Hi, my name's Hailie Kim, and I'm running for City Council in District 26. That means I'm running in Sunnyside, Woodside, Long Island City, and part of Astoria. When I was 5 years old, I remember my parents decided to come to New York City. When you're running a campaign, your parents tell you all sorts of things, so they told me the story of why they decided to come here. They told me that in 1998, there was an economic crash. And at around the same time, they were noticing inequities in the Korean education system that they really thought wouldn't suit me and my personality. They kind of gathered already that I was rather sensitive, so they thought an American education would be better for me and much more affordable for them. My dad had tried to invest in a business that crashed because of the economic crash. And so we arrived here in New York City where my grandparents were already living. My grandfather worked as a taxi driver, and one of the first things we did was get in his taxi to go to Woodside. And we spent a year there before moving to Sunnyside, where I've never left. I don't see why anyone would actually want to. You got everything you want there. And so I went to all the public schools there. I went to PS 150, where my parents didn't know that they could apply me for a gifted and talented program. They also didn't know that they could apply me for a middle school program, but my school helped me apply anyway. And so I got very lucky, and one of the first times I met a politician was actually the fact that my councilman at the time came and visited our school in 6th grade for our graduation and handed every student a dictionary. And I remember very sillily thinking, council member, that can't be that difficult. Many years later. And so growing up in a neighborhood like Sunnyside where everyone is actually so connected to each other, everyone's so politically involved, everyone's very opinionated, they're very real, they're never afraid to tell you what they think, it's impossible not to be interested in politics. And when I was organizing an Earth Day awareness petition, and when I was volunteering at a community organization called 노드들, which was in Woodside at the time, I joked that I would run for mayor of New York City one day. Many years later, I wanted to be a writer. I studied English literature, and my life took another twist, and I decided I wanted to be a professor. And I was doing my MA at Hunter. I graduated. I started adjuncting at Hunter College. And one of the things that I noticed were that my students had stories that were a lot like mine. Their parents were struggling. They were struggling. They needed to work jobs in order to be able to pay for college. And in the meanwhile, as an adjunct, we were being told, we don't have money to pay you. We're going to cut jobs for adjuncts, teachers, actual education, but we are going to hire more administrators. And also, we're going to raise your students' tuition, adding stress to their lives. What makes a good education? What makes a happy student? One, it's lack of stress due to that, which is why I believe in a fully funded public education system. I believe in a fully funded and free CUNY for my students. But we have to think of things holistically. What are other stressors that might make it so that students have difficulty concentrating when they're doing their work? Their parents telling them they're not able to afford the rent for the third time in the last couple of months is one of them. So in a district like mine that's been overrun with overdevelopment and rising rents, making sure that we fight developers who've been coming into our communities and telling us what to do for them is one of the things that we need to work on. We need a council member whose lived experience is actually going to make sure that they fight for working families in my district. There's also the idea that we need to fully implement universal rent control, making sure that families can actually afford to stay in the neighborhoods that they're living in, and that the rents are actually reasonable for them. There's also the issue of, I've been noticing during the pandemic, a rise in homelessness, which is statistically actually been proven as well. There's been homeless encampments forming underneath our elevated trains and the stations. And so during the pandemic, I actually ended up thinking a lot about what do I want to do for people who I've been working with? There are three things we need to do. One, we need to make sure that we have permanent supportive housing so that people who are homeless because of mental health issues and addiction issues are actually able to get subsidized housing as well as the services they need. We also need to make sure that we have a jobs program. I've been really excited thinking about a jobs program for our city where if we invest $1 billion into our people, into creating public sector jobs that actually are new, inventive, creative, don't compete with the private sector so it doesn't mess with inflation, we're actually going to be able to take 25,000 people who would otherwise be unemployed and get them to work. Let's also think about making sure that we have actual affordable housing. Let's make sure we have jobs for people, and let's make sure that we have permanent supportive housing. These are issues that affect my district, and these are issues that have affected my family. I remember my parents, when I was younger, had trouble affording the neighborhood that we were in. I've lived in Sunnyside for all my life, but we got priced out of the side of Sunnyside that is wealthier, more middle class, and we had to move to the other end of Queens Boulevard. And my mom has also always made it sure for her that she never kept anything from me about our family's finances. She works as a nail technician, she's very straightforward, and she never had trouble telling me, the rent's gone up again, it's really difficult to afford it, and so the political is always personal for me. And making sure that issues like that are resolved in my district is something I'm really passionate about. And making sure that people are actually employed, which is one of the biggest issues in our borough, because the unemployment rate in Queens has gone up to 10.7%, which is a drop from 20%. We need to resolve it. It's an urgent issue. It's also a mental health issue where if you're on unemployment for too long, there are adverse mental health effects. So let's make sure that we actually work for people who need our help and not for moneyed interests. I also want to tell the story of how my parents met and how that might affect why I might have actually been so interested in politics from the get-go. My mom, again, told me this story after I ran for office, but she told me that in the early 90s, when she and my dad met, the only reason they met was they were both at a student protest. There was tear gas involved, and they both escaped into the same cafe. And all the things that could have made it so that I didn't exist is actually very funny. But politics is actually what brought my parents together, and the political conditions of South Korea at the time brought my parents together. And talking to voters every day, making sure that I understand what they need has been really great during the campaign. And what can I say? The reason why I love being an educator at CUNY is also because of the same thing. Talking to my students, making sure that they're okay has been one of the things that kind of centered me as a candidate throughout the last couple of months, especially. Hearing stories about students who didn't know if they could afford the CUNY tuition anymore, so they were considering dropping out. Hearing stories of students who were worried because their parents got COVID, who then got COVID themselves. Hearing stories of students who were working 3 jobs and didn't know if they could make it to class. These are things that we shouldn't be having to deal with in the wealthiest city in the world. And how do we do that? I actually am very proud to be a democratic socialist. I believe that millionaires and billionaires and corporations have gotten away with not paying their fair share for far too long. I think they need to start looking at how the working class lives, at how everybody else lives, at how the 1% lives. And actually, we need to ask them to step up. It's their time. They need to show us that they care as well. And these are all the reasons I'm running for city council, and these are all the reasons I love my district so much. You see so many people who I identify with, and we see so many people who tell me stories every day of wanting to make sure that their small businesses survive. You hear stories of people who are afraid of being displaced from their homes. We hear stories of people who are worried for their children's future because their kids haven't been in school for over a year, and online schooling is just not working for them. So how do we make sure we fix the concerns that my constituents have? We're a district of parents, we're a district of small business owners, we're a district of immigrants, we're a diverse district, and we're a district that cares, ultimately. And these are values that my community has, that I share, and I want to bring to City Council. I want to make sure we have a government that actually cares, that shows that through the way that we work our budget, a government that makes sure that people are not having to sleep under the elevated trains because they're afraid of going into a shelter. These are the kinds of things that we need to fix. And we need a government who starts working for our families and for us. Thank you very much.